When we start out in 3ds Max, we start with a blank scene, unless we've opened up a scene. In this case, what we're seeing are 4 viewports: top, front, left, and perspective. They have a grid on them by default, and the center of the world, 0, 0, 0, is where the 2 black lines intersect. What I'll typically do is work in one big view, maximizing the real estate on my monitor. I'll press Alt-W, or click on the Maximize Viewport toggle, the absolute lowest right button on the UI. I'll open up my jungle and look at how to select some things, again clicking on the Open tab once I've selected the project. Here's my jungle base for example. To select an object in 3ds Max, simply click on it. I'll press Z to zoom extents, and there's one of my plants. What this shows me is that this is the plant. It's highlighted with a white wireframe on the shaded view, and its bounding box, the overall volume the plant fits in, is shown by these white corners. We can see here that the bounding box is oriented perhaps a little oddly. We'll fix this in later videos. This is a product of how it was put together, but for now it works for our purposes. To add to the selection, hold Ctrl and click on another object. To deselect, hold Alt and click on an object you'd like to deselect. If you'd like to change between shaded and wireframe, or wireframe view and realistic shaded for example, press F3. We can change around how our view looks very easily. F4 turns off the edged faces, so we just see the shaded plants. I can also click on the viewport label in the top left, where it says Realistic. And in here, I've got some different shading modes. Shaded, for example, a constant color. Consistent colors, meaning absolutely flat. And edged faces, turning on the wireframe on shaded to let me see the geometry. I also have some other choices, such as the bounding box or a clay render, depending on what I'm doing if I need to see it in a more sculpting type UI. I also have different views available, stylized views available with the nitrous viewports here in 2013. We can play with the stylized viewports later, and also showing lights and shadows in the scene if we'd like. For now, I'll just stay in realistic, and press F4 to toggle off and on those edged faces. With objects selected, if you press Z, you zoom extents. To orbit around the objects in the view, press Alt and click the mouse wheel in. This orbits around any view and is a terrific feature for really seeing what you're doing. Scrolling the mouse wheel in and out zooms in and out around the mouse wheel. Clicking the mouse wheel in and dragging pans the camera from side to side. We have easy-to-use hotkeys for switching our views as well. Right now you can see I'm in an orthographic view. I can press P for perspective, L for left, T for top for example, and F for front. And these are available in your Max Help. You can also click on the viewport label and choose your view, right for example, and bottom, and so forth. In any orthographic or straight-on view, holding Alt and clicking and dragging the mouse wheel changes to an orthographic. That's a drawn isometric, as opposed to P for perspective, producing a drawn 2-point perspective. It's only when we get a camera in can we press C to switch to a camera view. If you're working in multiple views, your view will be framed by a yellow border. As I have one big view here, it shows just the yellow border around my viewport. The Max UI is pretty straightforward. Up on top, replacing the traditional File menu is the Max icon, and here's Edit and Tools and so forth. Below this is the main toolbar with a lot of my commonly used tools, such as Select and Move. Below this is the Graphite Modeling ribbon, and as you can see by the tooltips, there's a lot of things we can do in it. I can change this around if I need by dropping down the arrow here. In this case, I'll minimize it down to the panel titles. On the right is our command panel, and a lot of what we'll do in terms of modifying objects and animation as well will take place here. Right now I'm on the Creation tab in the command panel, and the button is Geometry. Under Geometry then are my standard primitives, and I have other objects available. It's a drill-down structure and pretty straightforward. The general idea is we create objects, then we modify them. For example, this flower here in front, if I click on the bent blue tube for the Modify panel, is an editable poly, meaning that I've collapsed any history, and it's simply a collection of geometry right now that looks like a flower. I can drop down the modifier list and modify this if I'd like, perhaps unwrapping it or spreading it flat, bending it, which has already been done actually, twisting, tapering, and so forth. Down in the bottom then is our timeline, and we'll use this when we get to animating our cameras. In this case, I've configured the time to be in 24 frames per second, that of film, so I have 10 seconds available. Our viewport navigation is in the bottom right on the screen, and we'll get to this in future videos, but it's the same kind of controls we're dealing with when holding Alt and clicking the mouse wheel in, for example, orbiting and panning and so forth. Now that we can select objects and maneuver around our viewports to see what we need, let's get into moving, cloning, merging, and scaling our jungle together.